Okay. Hello, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Marcus. I'm here from FCJ Refugee Center. I'm here today with Loli, our co-director in the center, Loli Rico.
Hi.
Join us today. We also have Megan and Jen from Quinte. Megan, would you like to introduce yourself and Jen?
Hello, everybody. I'm the program manager at Quinte Immigration Services. I really appreciate you joining us for this webinar. We have a really great presentation coming up. I think you'll enjoy it. My coworker Jen doesn't have video, but she's here as well.
Hello. As Megan said, I'm a settlement worker at Quinte Immigration Services. So we're going to be going through the slides when we get to our part of the presentation together.
Perfect, thank you. So this is a joint presentation between us here at FCJ and Quinte Immigration as well. So we, as FCJ, we're gonna do the first part, and then Quinte is gonna jump in and finish talking a little bit about them, about their services, and about the Quinte region as well. And at the end, we can have some times for questions. So moving along, you can send us a question using the option on the right side of your screen. Depending on your system, it might look a little bit different from the one that is showing to you in the screen right now. But you can just find the question mark and send us questions that we can see it here. And at the end of the presentation, we are gonna be sharing the questions with Quinte, and we are gonna both be answering those questions. So to start, just a quick agenda of our presentation. We are just going to do a quick introduction about FCJ and about what we do. We're going to introduce our program, the Anti-Human Trafficking program, that is coordinated by Loli with Luis Alberto Mata. And we're going to talk a little bit about what we do and how we assist migrant workers and the challenges that migrant workers face in the community as well.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Marcos, and my name is Loli Rico. I'm the co-director of the FCJ. And just for you, for the region, we are located in Toronto, but our services are for everyone, all in Canada, but also in the region, in all the province. Most of our services, we started almost 30 years ago, and our approach is a holistic and collaborative case-centered approach, but also with a framework of gender anti-oppression and also anti-racism framework. One of the things that we start is that we have a program where we do all refugee protection for refugee claimants, or what they call lately asylum seekers. We provide them also a place to stay, but also to help them to go through the refugee process. We have a program that, as you see, we are talking today, doing webinars due to COVID, but usually we go to the places and we have our program of popular education. Because one of the things that we have as a policy in our organization is that we wanted to share all our experience in a way that everybody is well informed. We have a very strong youth network that is a youth lead program. That is, we welcome all youth, no matter what is their immigration status or how they identify. And at the moment that they identify as a youth, they are more than welcome. They have run their own programs. And one of the main goals is that they can take leadership. And as we will talk today, we will talk about our anti-human trafficking program, but also under our anti-human trafficking program, we have a migrant workers mobile program. And for people with precarious migrants, or people without status, or people that they don't have access to the health card or to the interim federal health program, we have a primary care team. What is our work in human trafficking? One of the things that we have been doing this is almost than 12 years, providing direct services to trafficked persons. And if you see, we don't talk about victim of human trafficking. We talk about traffic because it's a way to give, again, back the control and the power of the person that they can take a decision. We produce training and we provide training to different organizations, service providers, frontline workers, but also we do info sessions for people who are at the high risk on the human trafficking. One of the things that we identified 10 years ago is that we cannot do everything by ourselves. And one of the things that we did is that we start getting together with other organizations, which in Toronto, in which one we find the Toronto Counter Human Trafficking Network, and we are one of the organizations that we funded and we coordinate. As well, even though we have a system, a network in Toronto, in human trafficking, and as you will see, it's a movement of people. And we need to have also coordination in a national way. Because one of the things that we do is that we need to connect. As the trafficker move people, we also sometimes for safety, we need to move our clients to another place with their own decision. And in that case, we become members of the Canadian Council for Refugees, a steering committee against human trafficking, in which one we were one of the funders as well. When we talk about our anti-oppressive and gender and anti-racism approach, it's at the lens where we see the impact and intersectionality for a person who has been trafficked make a major impact depends on your race, depends on your sexual orientation, your gender identity, nationality, if you are in a disability. That there are some issues that we don't talk sometimes when in human trafficking. When you have the concept of human trafficking, is that it's only one person and one specific, most of the time they talk about women, and then they put it in a situation of victimization. And what we are trying to see is how we can understand that that person has been a trafficked person because their race, their sexual orientation, their gender identity, or if a person with disability or the nationality. One of our focus is in international cases because as you are coming from another country and you come into Canada, they have a lot of challenges. And if your immigration status is a big challenge as well, because depends what is your immigration status, that's what is the services that you are allowed. What is our program? Our program, the Migrant Workers Mobile Program, and that's why, because COVID-19, we are not in Quinte, but we will love to be in Quinte, is that we go where are the workers. And the idea is that what we found out is we receive before phone calls from different parts of Toronto asking help for migrant workers, or the temporary foreign workers program, or people without status that they are working outside Toronto or even inside Toronto. And in that case, we say, well, let's go as we do our training is to have a mobile program that we can bring all our services outside Toronto. And the idea is the main, because in human trafficking, you need to prevent. And one is the prevention of labor exploitation. And we do that when we are giving info sessions with migrant workers, and we talk about labor rights and also what is your immigration options. Identify what is the high risk or the risk of potential labor cases, labor exploitation cases, and also we see a holistic case management support. What that means is a case center, but we see it in a holistic approach. For example, in my office, we have different areas where the person is, for example, in immigration process or temporary resident permit that we will talk, that person will be seen in our team. But then we need to do the person as an option, a humanitarian compassion grounds. That person, we will refer them to our another team that has the expertise. Or if they need housing, we have someone to find out housing. And that's what we try. And also, the main goal when we say a client center is that it's up to their choice. If the person have a choice, because when you are in a trafficking situation, that's the first thing that the person loses, the choice. They make a choice to come to Canada, but they didn't make the choice to do the work that they were putting on. Also, the other part that we do, as we are doing, is outreach in a way that we can contact organizations that they are outside Toronto where we can work together in cases. And that's why it's really nice to have with the Quinte here because that's always we try to coordinate and we do outreach. For example, there is a mobile program of the Justice Mobile Program of lawyers on the employment elements where we can do the referral and we can work together. We talk a lot about precarious status of migrant. For us, it's anyone who doesn't have a permanent residence in Canada or it is not a citizen. For example, refugee claimants, refused refugee claimants, temporary foreign workers, migrant workers, members of the SWAP, that is the Agricultural Worker Program, the international students, visitors, people that for any reason they were in the different programs, they stay without status, or their stay in Canada expired, or anyone that also that sometimes you come to Canada and you are promised to be sponsored by a spousal sponsorship, and you are in the process of the sponsorship, and there is a breakdown of domestic violence situation. And that's, for us, is a huge number of people that they are in that situation of migration, which is give them a vulnerability situation. Let's talk what is human trafficking. In human trafficking, the definition is a long definition, but what has to have three components. One is an act, that means an action, what has been done. It means how that have been done and the purpose of the exploitation. We are going to focus on if you see what is done, if someone is recruited, someone is transported, someone is transferred, someone is harboring persons, or someone is receiving persons, could be if there is that means is because I've been in a threat, coercion, abduction, fraud, deception, abuse of power, abuse of position of vulnerability, and giving and receiving payments to benefit the person. But what is the purpose of that? We will be forced labor or servitude, slavery or similar practices. In the servitude, removal of organs, forced marriage, and sexual exploitation. Even though in the legislation said prostitution, we call sexual exploitation because there are some sex workers that they are working because their choice. We are going to focus today what is in forced labor or servitude. But what I'm talking is worse. I can give you one example. A person had been recruited outside the country of origin. They said apply for the electronic travel permit, that in that way you can come to Canada and you come as a visitor. But that person had been said by the recruiter that at the minute that you receive that document, you will be able to work. We go to the means. That means it was any coercion or deception. And they start saying, okay, if you work with us and you are working here and they are here in Canada and say, well, your document is not valid for work. And they start using the abuse of power in a way that they say, if you don't do what I said, or you don't work with us, I will kick you out and I will call immigration that you are breaking the law. The other is an abuse of position of vulnerability. You are a young girl that you have been sent by your family to another family member, and this family member say, well, to give you place to stay and food, you need to help me to clean in the cleaning, or you need to help me with the service of the house. And in that case, we can move and say, well, she is working as a domestic worker, but she is in the area of servitude. Why? Because in the servitude, it's a person that doesn't have a work permit, it's no pay, because supposedly they are paying with food and house, but she's doing a job that has to be paid and receive the minimum wage. That's one of the examples when we define human trafficking. And we will continue talking about that.
So now we are going to talk a little bit more about human trafficking for labor exploitation. That's our main focus here at the center. to fight human trafficking, we focus a lot on labor trafficking, especially with migrant workers. So migrant workers could be farm workers, could be seasonal foreign workers who come to Canada to work in the farmers or to work in the specific areas where there's no skill in Canada, that they need to hire someone from the outside, and they bring someone temporary to work here for 3 years or for 2 years with a tied work permit or something like this. Also international students, or just as Loli was mentioning before, even refugees and refugee refugee claimants could be survivors of human trafficking for labor exploitation. So what exactly is labor trafficking? So it's when you're doing work against your will, or sometimes you even want to be there, you want to be in Canada, working in Canada, but someone is taking advantage of you, someone is holding your documents, or someone's not paying you enough, or someone is even like removing money from your paycheck illegally. All those could be signs of exploitation. All that could be signs of labor trafficking. And where could this happen? Could it happen as domestic workers? Some people come to Canada to be domestic workers, as caregivers. This could happen in hospitality, in the beauty industry, even constructions. We have lots of cases in constructions, especially with clients without status, without proper documentation to work in Canada. Happens also in factories, in farms, as we mentioned before, also with sex work, and also begging could also be a sign of labor trafficking. Some people who are begging on the street, but they're not begging for themselves, they are begging for someone else who recruited them to be in downtown Toronto begging. So that's also an example of labor trafficking. And what is the cycle of exploitation? So there's someone who comes from a foreign country, arrives in Canada without knowing the language, without speaking English, without speaking French, and they face language barriers. With that lack of language, of the skills that they have, they don't have access to government services because they basically don't know how to look for help. They don't know, even if they go on the internet and they try to search something, if they search it in Spanish, or if they search it in Portuguese or any other language that's not English or French, they might not find the answers for the exploitation that they are facing right now. And what it means that they will be working in isolation without the knowledge, and that's where we try to intervene. So we try to bring knowledge, we try to empower our clients and empower workers with knowledge, so they can exit the cycle of exploitation once they know their rights, once they understand that what they are going through, it's illegal, and that even if they're here without a status, they still have rights, that the same rights that apply to every single worker in Canada will also apply to our worker that's here working without a status. So that's what we try to do. We try to bring knowledge to them. We try to empower those workers so they can break the cycle themselves. So how can you identify human trafficking? How can you identify labor trafficking? So a couple of indicators. So for example, working or living conditions. So if you don't have control to live as you want, if you're stuck in the farm, if you need to go to the grocery store, you need to ask permission to leave. Or if you're not being paid, if you're not receiving enough payment, if you're working long hours without proper pay as well, if you don't have breaks, if your manager, your boss is not letting you take your breaks, if your recruiter tells you that you have a large debt with them, like, I brought you to Canada, you had a debt with me, for the next 3 months you're going to be working and I will be collecting half of your payment to pay the debt that you have with me. And also for recruitment. Nowadays, with internet, a recruiter in Canada can recruit from any other country in the world. So let's say I'm in Brazil and I'm on Facebook, and there's someone on Facebook telling me, oh, come to Canada and I will, and you have the life that you don't have in Brazil. You earn in Canadian dollars that it's worth way more than Brazilian money. You just come here, you don't need work papers, like just come as a visitor and I will give you work. So they're being recruited under false premises. So another indicators now about the person behavior, like the personal behavior of the worker. So if the worker is fearful, if the worker is anxious or depressed, submissive, they're tense, nervous, or paranoid, there are little indicators that you need to catch when you're talking with a client, when you're talking with a worker, that could indicate that they are being victims of, that they're being survivors of human trafficking. So next, so for example, so to understand a little bit of the mindset of someone who has been trapped, so someone that is entrapped in a labor exploitation situation, many times they are loyal to the traffickers, to the recruiters, just because it's a person with power against them, someone who speaks their same language, so they have a rapport, they have a connection with the trafficker, and they would believe anything that the trafficker tell them, just because they have that connection, the personal connection with them. They also might feel responsible for being on the position that they are right now, and they are afraid of seeking for help, because they say like, oh, I'm at this situation because I wanted to come to Canada. That's what I chose for my life, and that's why I'm here right now. And they are afraid of breaking the cycle of exploitation because of that. And also they're fearful. They have fear of being deported. Something that we found to be pretty common with traffickers, with sorry, with the employers that work with people without a status, especially. They say, oh, if you fight for your rights, if you're not happy with the work that I'm here giving to you, I'm gonna deport you. I'm gonna call immigration. Immigration is gonna be here. You're gonna be sent back to your country. So they use fear, they use threat to get the workers to do whatever the trafficker wants. And also self-identification. Sometimes they don't even identify themselves as the survivors of traffic. They don't understand that situation, and they're also distrustful. So because once before, someone told them that they would come to Canada to work, someone made promises to them, and now you're trying to break them out of the cycle of exploitation. You also make promises to them. They might not trust you the same way, because they already mistreated before. They already deceived before. And another huge indicator of human trafficking and labor trafficking, it's a lack of control. So they don't have access to their own, to their personal belongings. They don't have access to their passports. They don't have access to their any kind of immigration document or any kind of personal documents, because the trafficker is holding these documents against them. So they cannot even leave the country without the permission of the trafficker. They don't have control of their own money. So sometimes the trafficker will bring them to the bank so they can open a bank account. They will open a bank account under their name, but the trafficker will hold to the debit card. The trafficker will go bi-weekly, every 2 weeks, the trafficker will go to the bank to withdraw the money that they are being paid. The trafficker will collect some of the money and then will give the remaining money to the worker. And that's how they don't have control to their own money. And also, once again, they don't have control of their personal documents and communication. Sometimes when they go to the bank account, to the bank to create a bank account, for example, they do not speak as for themselves. They need the trafficker to be there, since they don't speak the language, and the trafficker will be identify themselves as an interpreter. So I'm here to interpret between you two, and that's end up with the person being trafficked don't being allowed to speak for themselves. So whoever is talking to them is the own trafficker. So that's why it's hard for them to get out of that situation. So here's a little graph just to show a little bit of how exploitation and how it works. So for example, if you're going from the center to the outside, you see what drives people to leave their country and come to Canada to work. So there is inequality, there is globalization, there is so there's a weak labor in their country, and they need to go somewhere else to achieve what they are being promised, because they see on TV, they see on the movies the amazing life that there is in let's say in Canada or in the US, and they want that for themselves, and because of this globalization, because of this inequality, they want to go to those countries. They want to work in Canada so they can send money to their families, so their families can have access to the same quality of life that they would have here in Canada. So before going to these places, you have the pre-departure, where there are extortions, there's loans, or personal humanitarian crisis that they're fleeing from. And in the destination, once they arrive, they will find unfair employment terms, they will find hazard work conditions, violence, confinement. And in case they need to return to their country, they will have no assistance, they will have poor legal remedies and compensations. So it's a whole cycle of violence, of abusive employment terms, of unfair loan arrangements, and extensive hours of work. So just to illustrate a little bit of how harm and how exploitation works in the labor industry.
Let's talk how will be the options on immigration status and how that also immigration perpetuates the exploitation in some of the cases. For example, when someone comes, and we can say that the immigration status is fluid. That means moves around. Depends how you come. And with which status, immigration status you come. That could be that you are moving forward, like if you come with a work permit, and that work permit is with employer that treat you well, respect all the rights of the employment standards and all the labor laws. And with that, you stay in Canada and you come in a classification where you can apply for your permanent resident, which is depends of if you come in a managerial status or you come as to work in a tech industry, then you can apply for your permanent resident. But if you come as a visitor and you see that you don't have options in your country, or someone tells you, stay, we will help you, and you overstay your status, then it start coming very weird. Or you come as you are refugee claimant, and you receive a negative decision, your status start shaking. Or if you come as a temporary foreign worker, and you are waiting for your new work permit that someone say, I will apply, and they will renew and never happen. And if you are in as I said before, you come in a spousal sponsorship, and then the situation in the meantime, you receive the permanent resident finish, that's where you start moving to a situation that you can become a non-status. And you can become a non-status worker because you need to survive and you start working. As well, when international students, that's one of the places and the situations where how countries in the first world, they take advantage of people that they are coming from other countries. For example, international students, the tuition is 3 times more than someone living in Canada. And in that case, it's a big debt. And they come and they have the possibility to work, but only 20 hours per week. That means they'll have a time of a part-time job in which it's very challenging to support themselves. And sometimes because the economical situation or what happened in your country, clear example when was the situation in Syria, there were a lot of students from Syria here, but when was the war, the parents couldn't send more money and they have to, they end up in a non-status because they couldn't continue with the school. What we try to do to explain with all these different examples is that immigration status before you become permanent resident is a fluid situation and give the opportunities or the gaps that someone can exploit you, and also the complexity of to understand the whole immigration process that also gives the opportunity that someone can take advantage of you. What is some of the vulnerability for persons without status and the vulnerabilities that they can be exploited? First of all, because you don't have a work permit, you will be likely that you will be paid cash. Sometimes in the construction, they say, yes, we will pay you every 2 weeks like everybody else. But at the second week, they say, well, I will pay you 1 week, I owe you another week. And in that case, you start putting the debt, no, that the employer haven't paid the total amount. The other is that they say, well, the minimum wage is in Ontario is $14, 14 and 15 cents. And they say, well, you don't have a work permit, but I will pay you 12. Because most of the time the recruiter, they receive $16, $18 per hour per employee, but they pay only 12, 13, less than the minimum wage in a way that they can take more advantage. And because you don't have a status, it's going to be very difficult to do a complaint and also to have access to services because you don't have a permanent status, you are not eligible for some of the settlement services, you don't know where to go. That's why it's important to be informed that there are legal clinics that you can go and complain. And also, no matter what is your status, you have a right under the employment standards in Ontario to complain and also to receive receive benefit. If someone doesn't pay, you can take them to the court, to the Minister of Labor, and to really get your money back. What is the, let's talk, sorry. Let's talk about the temporary foreign worker program. What is that? We have two different programs. We have different programs. The temporary foreign worker program was before related to the agriculture on the home caregiver program. But in 2008, at that time, the federal government opened up to anyone who wants to come to work to Canada and to give the employers to hire migrant worker skills to fill the shortage of the gaps. What have been given with the challenge that we have with this program is that to apply for a permanent resident in some of, depends of the levels, you are eligible. But we are talking what are the most vulnerable. And I want to bring the seasonal agricultural workers program. That program is focused only with some states in the Caribbean and Mexico. And it's that the relation between the government of Canada and the governments of the different states, different countries. And in that case, they come, they are putting in a plane, they come and work directly with the farm. They work for a month, 8 months, sometimes a year, and then they go back. And that has been, it's an historical program, which you never will have the opportunity to apply for permanent residence if you want. I keep saying, you don't want, if some people, they don't want to apply, but at least to have an opportunity. And the other is what we call the agricultural stream, that these with people that they can come with a temporary foreign worker program for 2 years, that especially for countries that they don't have an agreement with government. They are the private companies or the farmers, they have relations with other countries. I can use one example that is very clear, is Guatemala. Guatemala is not in the SWAT program, but they are bringing a lot of people from Guatemala, especially in our areas of Ontario, and maybe in Quinte area, that they come with these 2 years that can be renewed. The other that we have, what we were having before, the living caregiver program, but now we changed the name in home caregiving. That is we have two streams, home support worker and home child care provider pilot. That is still the home caregiving program. They are pilot projects that they give the opportunity to the person to work as a caregiver, that they don't need to live in the place, and with the possibility that they can bring their family. In this program, if you meet the criteria as language and also the time and the hours working, you can apply for a permanent residence. Why I'm talking about the temporary foreign worker program before, because there are some elements that give gaps in a way that they can be a situation of human trafficking. In the chart that you see, do you see what is the elements, for example, of the temporary foreign program? It's for individuals that they can come with low income. Many of them, they are people that they come to Canada and they have been living in the agricultural countryside of their countries. They have experience in agricultural, or also they come with a name. That's the most challenging, because it's the name of your work permit of your employer. That in Canada, if you come as a permanent resident, you don't have that name of the employer, and any Canadian will work in a place where you are attached to your employer. That's one challenge. The other is it restricts labor mobility and ability to have your rights. Like, for example, in the SWAP program or temporary foreign workers, there is no right to organize, to be unionized. Also, we can see what is the different power imbalance between the employer and the employee, and that you are in remote rural areas. From this chart, we move to what are the elements of human trafficking. Who are they? As individuals that they are vulnerable in communities, individuals that have been experienced poverty. And the second is if you come with a Thai work permit, that means the elements is that you are not free to leave or to do a move as you wish. And the power of imbalance is when the employers start doing coercion, control, use of threats, abuse of power, and remote rural areas. Trafficker isolate the individual. And in that case, in the remote rural areas, there is also challenges of access to services, even settlement services, but also other type of community services. And in that case, what we need to see is that the temporary foreign work program gives some elements and some gaps that can be challenging and elements of the human trafficking. And that's why we have been seeing cases in that program that they have been exploited. What is the protection? Because we have been talking about what are the gaps in the immigration programs, no? But the protections that we have only one. If you are recognized as a victim of human trafficking, you have access to the temporary resident permit. First of all, this one was introduced in 2006, haven't been any changes, which is from 2006 until now, 2020, we have been going through different experiences of human trafficking situations in Canada that will be able to give a little bit more to review this program, no? But what the program gives you the possibility that you can have a temporary resident permit, which give you the possibility that you can stay in Canada temporarily. You will receive a work permit. You have a health coverage. You can apply for a study permit. And in some cases, you can apply for social assistance. What is the limits in the protection of the TRPs, which I will mention, that temporary resident permit, is that doesn't give you pathways to the permanent resident unless that you have been receiving the TRPs for 5 years. Also, there is no always a guarantee that they will renew. The other challenge is that immigration has to consult with CBSA, the Canadian Border Service Agency, or with the RCMP in a way that there is an investigation. The other is that the discretion and inconsistency, because it's an immigration officer who decides, and based on their experience, and some of the challenges is that on labor exploitation, there is not much experience on the immigration officer. They know about human trafficking, but more on the sexual exploitation. And in that case, sometimes it varies the decisions. And also the other is that with this, doesn't give you the possibility to reunify with your family. until you receive the permanent residence. The other problem that we have in limits in protection is that they give you for 6 months the temporary residence permit, but to renew it, you need, even though in the guideline doesn't say that you need to collaborate with the authorities, but for the renewal, you need to be involved in the investigation or have been collaborating with the authorities on the investigation of the case. And in that case, that gives some challenges to receive the temporary residence permit. The other element is that we can use, which is we call, and we can talk in another presentation, what is humanitarian compassion grounds application. That is one of the other elements, immigration programs that you can apply if you are in a victim of human trafficking or you have been trafficked. What is that? It's that you need to prove, because you receive the TRP, you have a work permit, and you need to prove that you are established in Canada. Means you need to consider as establishment the previous time that you came, that you have been working, even though without work permit, but it is considered that as establishment. It's raining in Toronto. I don't know how it's windy, and which is good. The other element that they are looking is that besides the establishment, what will be the huge ownership that you will go if you go back to your country. And in that case, not always you receive a permanent residence through the humanitarian compassion grounds. The percentage of acceptance is under 50%. With that note, any questions we will do at the end of the presentation with my friends from Quinte, but you will see in this we finished that this is our team, or the anti-human trafficking team, that we speak Spanish, Portuguese, French, and if you have any questions, you can contact us at our phone, our line, and also in our WhatsApp. We have a WhatsApp. And also you can go to our website.
Thank you so much to everyone. Now we're gonna pass the presentation to Quinte, and I think Megan's gonna be speaking now.
Great. Thank you so much, Marcus and Loli. Really appreciate this partnership and this presentation. Really excited to work with you guys today. So for our part, if you could just, next slide, please. There we go. So for anyone attending who doesn't already know, Quinte Immigration Services, we're a nonprofit. We were originally founded in 1986. Please let me know if you can't hear me. I've had some issues with my microphone recently. But we are located in Belleville. We are currently on College Street West. We are beside the Drive Test Center. We're funded by Immigration, Refugee, and Citizenship Canada, but we're not an office of IRCC. There was once upon a time, IRCC actually had physical offices that people who needed immigration information could go to. Those no longer exist essentially, but we are a nonprofit that's funded by them. So we can provide some information, but we're not an actual branch of IRCC. We're also funded by the Ministry of Citizenship and Immigration of Ontario, which doesn't technically exist anymore due to provincial budget cuts. But due to the contracts that are signed, we still have funding until the end of March of 2021. So some things may change next year, but we'll get there when we get there. Our employment programs are funded by the Ministry of Training, Colleges and Universities, and we receive some funding from the City of Quinte West and the City of Belleville. If you don't mind, next slide. Thank you. So we have quite a large catchment area compared to other settlement agencies in places like Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal. We cover all of Hastings County up into the Bancroft area, all of Prince Edward County, about halfway into Northumberland, Colborne, Brighton area, and east to Napanee. Kingston has its own settlement services agency, so it's sort of a matter of which direction people want to drive. We provide direct settlement services. We'll talk in more detail about what those entail, but we provide them to people regardless of status, permanent residents, citizens, refugee claimants, people without status. We take all kinds. even Canadian family members of immigrants, we also help them, especially since during sponsorships, it's usually the first contact is with the spouse or the family member that's already in Canada. So we're happy to help anyone, essentially. We currently have 9 staff members, soon to be 10. Generally, we have volunteers and placement students, but COVID. So it's just us staff for the moment. If you don't mind, next slide, please. There we go. I'll talk about, I have notes because I don't want to miss anything. So I'll talk about our services. So we provide assistance with immigration processes. We're not immigration consultants or lawyers, so we can't actually fill out applications for anyone, but we can review them, we can provide information, some administrative support. You know, as technology progresses, it leaves people behind. Not everyone can access the forms because they've shifted almost entirely to digital. So if you don't have a computer at home or the computer doesn't have the appropriate software, under normal circumstances, you're more than welcome to come to our office and use the computers. Right now we're closed due to COVID, but we are providing services by phone, email, Skype, and we may be having WhatsApp soon as well, so that's exciting. We can provide referrals for all sorts of things. We're happy to provide, again, administrative support, especially when it comes to people who are permanent residents, refugee claimants. Your status impacts a lot of things, what you can apply for, how you apply for it. So we take all questions, essentially. If we can't answer it, we'll find you someone that can answer it. And we're happy to pass on information over the phone, by email. So if you have clients and you have a very specific question, feel free to shoot us an email, give us a call. We're happy to help. We also, in some ways, provide advocacy services. Sometimes clients kind of run into areas of misinformation out in the community, or they have trouble accessing supports due to language barriers. So we're happy to make that happen. It's very hard when you're in a new country and you're trying to, number one, figure out where you need to go. Number two, actually get the help. As we know, there's a lot of services that have complex processes that can be challenging even for people who spent their whole lives in Canada. So we're happy to make phone calls and do what we can within our capacity to support people to make sure they get the services they need. So monthly information sessions, again, that's changed a little bit due to COVID, but we are trying to do some of them virtually. We also have community connection events throughout the year. We do a big holiday party in December. Everybody who comes, they get a gift for their child, they get dinner. It's really wonderful. We do smaller events throughout the year. We also have some employment programs. So STEP, as it's been acronymed, Skills Training Employment Program. So that's specifically for permanent residents, citizens, and protected persons. It's part of the Skills Advancement Ontario funding. So it does involve 5 weeks of currently online training, a 2-week paid job placement, and then hopefully it'll lead to hiring. So if you have clients that are looking for work, by all means refer them to us. Any clients who don't fit under the STEP program can go through our EDTI program, which is called Economic Development Through Immigration. That provides more general job support, resume building, things like that. So again, if you have clients that are looking for work, we can provide just a little bit extra sort of advocacy and support because, again, newcomers and refugees face barriers to employment. I'm pretty sure everyone here knows that. So we're happy to help our clients on their employment journey. CEOTIS is sort of my brand of things. We have a fee-for-service based interpretation and translation services. Again, right now it's being conducted by email and phone. Our interpretation service runs 24/7, so it's available for emergencies. And translations, we're able to do many different languages. We can do driver's license, birth certificates, all that sort of thing. We can also, for fellow agency staff, if you have materials that you want translated into another language, happy to help you out with that. We just wrapped up our community volunteer income tax program for the year. So every year we offer it to our clients specifically. So if anyone's not our client already, we can just get them registered and they're able to come in, or in this case, for part of the year, we did it over the phone and we're able to get their taxes done. Especially for newcomers, there's some sort of quirks to the process and it might be easier to get it done at our office versus, you know, the H&R Block or the one that's offered at the college campus or things like that. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jen. If you don't mind, next slide. Thank you.
Thanks, Megan. So we wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about the different types of work permits that are available and talk a little bit more in detail about how these interact with each other and how they impact migrant workers. Loli spent a little bit of time talking about some of the specific programs. And I think what we wanted to highlight as well is that unlike what you might have heard called the express entry system, which is skilled workers coming to Canada and getting permanent residence, or through what used to be called the live-in caregiver program, most of the temporary foreign worker permit programs, including the seasonal agricultural worker program, is not a path for permanent residency, meaning that a lot of those workers may come to Canada year after year for decades and spend the majority of their careers in farming, producing food and working in Canada and paying taxes in Canada, and never actually having the ability to take advantage of any of those benefits. There's no permanent status that they receive, and there's no real way, in most cases, when their work permits have ended, that they can collect things like EI or stay for a longer period of time, because their work permits are tied to their employer and they expire at specific times. So I think there's a lot of misconception around some smaller areas maybe that aren't as familiar with these programs, where the labor is just labor itself. And there's no real recognition of the fact that the people that are part of these programs are paying taxes. They are paying into things like the pensions and other deductions that would come off of your paycheck in a normal way. And they don't really have access to these things. So the open work permit that you can see on the screen there, that's a work permit that is essentially how it sounds. It's open for any employer that you choose to work for. So again, Loli was talking about choice and the ability to choose where you're going and who you want to work with. And this is allowed through the open work permit. Generally, getting an open work permit is quite limited. It's usually granted to people that had already been given some kind of confirmation of permanent resident status. Or if you're in the process of making your refugee claim, you're able to apply for an open work permit. There are some cases within the vulnerabilities of people who have been trafficked where they might be able to get an open work permit, but again, we talked about the level of evidence and the amount of support and documentation that they have to provide is quite high. So generally getting an open work permit is quite limited to specific situations. The other type of open work permit that we see a lot at the office is what's called a post-graduation work permit. And what that is it's a open work permit that's issued to students who have completed some kind of post-secondary education in Canada. So this work permit, it's usually issued to a maximum of 3 years. And within that time, the students are expected to have gained a certain amount of experience at a certain level of work experience in order to then go into the pool for the express entry system. And I think, again, a lot of people think that if they come to study in Canada and they can get the postgraduate work permit and then they get the permanent residence, and it will all just line up perfectly. And it's quite a bit more complicated than that. And a lot of the times the jobs that are available for international students aren't necessarily going to fit within the requirements for the work experience. And quite often we see students come in and they worked for a year and they're all ready to do their application. And we have to be the ones to tell them that the year that they spent working wasn't actually in a field that's going to be qualified for them to be into the pool for express entry, and that they maybe need to reconsider, or they need to put in another year or something like that. But generally it's quite disheartening for them to hear that. And there's not a lot of understanding about how all of these different types of work permits are really quite restricted to the immigration status that you have and the situation that you find yourself in. Next slide. So there are other different types of immigration pathways to Canada. We have a fair number of family sponsorships that we see, but I think, again, along the lines of some misinformation in our area specifically, is that there is an ability, if you are currently an international student, that you can bring your spouse, if you happen to be married, you can bring your spouse to Canada and you can apply for an open work permit for that person. A lot of people, we hear a lot of international students calling this a sponsorship. It's not actually. That language isn't correct. It's an ability for, in terms of family reunification, for people to come and bring their spouse while they're studying, and their spouse can get an open work permit. I think a lot of times when I'm out in the community as a settlement worker, people will say to me, how come I haven't been able to bring my own family member here when all of these students are bringing their spouses along? And it's a bit more complicated than that. So I think it is worth mentioning because it's probably one of the top comments that we hear from members of the public and from also the students that we interact with. We also serve refugees and refugee claimants. We can help them in understanding the process. We can help connect them to services, and we can also give them some guidance as to how to prepare for their hearing, what kind of documentation do they need to look at, what should they be thinking about. As Megan mentioned, we're not lawyers and we're not immigration consultants, so we don't have the legal authority to actually fill out forms or to do applications for people, but we're certainly willing to give the information, and we can help guide you in the process and help act as a resource for information that people need. The express entry system here, which I had mentioned, which is generally for skilled workers coming into Canada to receive permanent residence, is a points-based system. And you'll see there in the bullet points all of the different aspects that are considered when you're making an express entry profile. And so it's a lot of different variables that will earn you different points depending on what the requirements of each one of those sections are. So again, it's not this idea of, you've got this sort of golden ticket, if it were, and then everything is going to just happen around you. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about that, which leads people into more precarious or more vulnerable situations when they realize that they didn't actually get the information that they should have from the outset, and now they either need to create a bunch of extra work for themselves, or they are in a situation that maybe they can't get out of, right? And we have to, that's where we help with the problem solving and accessing services and things of that nature. Next slide. So, and Megan, feel free to jump in here with your own experiences. Here we've got I think it's a fairly comprehensive list of some of the challenges that are faced by temporary foreign workers and migrant workers in Hastings and Prince Edward. We do have a program that's based out of Belleville that's called Loyola College, and they are the main provider for English as a second language and any kind of skills training and upgrading services. At one time, we were housed in the same building, and so our relationship was quite strong with them. We've moved out to different buildings now, but we still try to maintain quite a good relationship with them because they're likely the only other agency in the area that has direct contact with our clients. And so we often work in collaboration with them. I believe that they had in the past tried to present some sort of modified English classes for migrant workers or providing classes that were at different times of the day, but it ultimately was quite full of challenges because of the next bullet point, which is transportation. And anyone that's familiar with our area knows that we have no public transit system. So if you're traveling from Belleville and you're trying to get a half an hour to Trenton, or you're trying to get 45 minutes to Picton on a good day, there is a Quinte access that you can take, which is a bus. It runs on a specific schedule. But if you're trying to, say, get from your location as a farm worker into Belleville to go to the mall so that you can shop for things and bring them back to your family, you really have to largely rely on the kindness of your employer to drive you somewhere. So that's a big challenge for a lot of clients, actually, and for a lot of people that have always lived in this area. Transportation remains one of the biggest hurdles that we have locally. Affordable housing is not any different from the rest of Ontario, where we just have a real serious lack of housing that's available, as well as housing that's available and affordable at the same time.
I will jump in to say I was recently crafting a report for one of our programs. I had to research some local statistics. And what I found out was that Belleville, actually, there was only data available for Belleville, unfortunately. Belleville has a higher per year rent increase than Toronto does, which, considering the knowledge of how excessive Toronto rents are and how unaffordable housing is there, we actually statistically surpass Toronto in a lot of ways in terms of lack of affordable housing, lack of available housing. So we quite often hear from clients, you know, I'm in a 2-bedroom apartment with 3 roommates, or in some cases, I was speaking with the fire prevention office to set up an information session, and he said they were often getting calls to apartments full of international students who are 7 and 8 and an apartment meant for maybe 2 or 3. And that's a really unsafe situation. And as we go through these bullet points, like, you'll see how it comes together. If someone's working minimum wage, if they can only work so many hours per week because of visa restrictions or because of, you know, they have to study, they have to do other things, their schedule isn't predictable, all these factors, that's what they end up having to do, but they end up in these really unsafe situations. And that's a very pressing issue, and that's something we need to keep in mind when we're out and about in the community, why people end up in these housing situations that aren't safe.
That's a really good point, Megan. And I think as well, to bring the focus back again to what we're discussing today, is all of these things coexist, right? All of these things are impacting one another. They're all layered on top of each other. So when you consider in the context of temporary foreign workers and farm laborers, generally they have the tied work permits that Loli mentioned, where they can only work for that employer. And also within the contracts, the employer must provide housing, must provide food, must provide, you know, wages and everything. So if that one employer ends up, you know, not being the best boss that you've ever had, to say it politely, you know, all of the things in your life are tied to that person. So it's not like if you are a Canadian citizen and you don't like the job that you're doing and you leave and you either find another job or maybe you're lucky enough to collect EI. You know, this is not the reality for most farm laborers. Everything that they require is provided to them by their employer. And so if you're stuck with your employer who's, you know, putting you in risky situations, there's really no recourse for you. I think even if you had the best situation where your employer really is thoughtful and caring and taking care of you, I know a lot of the farm workers here come back to the same farms year after year, and they've really built up long-term relationships with their employers. There are a lot of good examples in this area, but even still, all of these challenges still exist, right? They exist within the community. They exist as well for migrant workers coming into the community. So I think I'm just going to go down to the bottom of this list here, where it says the visa and the flight delays. We have been increasing our outreach to actual farms in this area, trying to find out what their challenges are, trying to talk to them and open up conversations so that we can identify some of these issues in a more clearer sense. And every single one that I have heard has had some sort of visa or flight delays, meaning that they have less workers available than they would normally do and still the same amount of work. So everyone is sort of feeling the pinch of having to work longer days, having to, work in not so great conditions if it's super hot like it is the last few days here. We've had a real heat wave and we've had absolutely no rain. So as a farmer, you're thinking, how am I going to face all these challenges? And if you don't have the staff that you are counting on because of COVID and because of flight delays and additional charges, again, this is one more layer that's sort of impacting all of these situations that could become risk factors in the future. Next slide. And I think, Megan, did you want to talk about this one in regards to public health?
For sure, absolutely. So I won't read the entire order to you. You can read on the screen as well as an HP Public Health's official press release. But they have issued an order in order to protect farm workers specifically. So it's all listed there about what they need for living conditions. They're doing mandatory testing. My understanding is that they're doing sort of pop-up testing and going from farm to farm. And I think this is absolutely wonderful. HP Public Health has just done a tremendously excellent job at handling the COVID situation in the Quinte region. And I'm so glad they made this an order and not voluntary, because there are a lot of good farms in this area who do treat their workers really well and have great relationships with them. But those would be the ones volunteering and really not having any problems, and the ones that maybe are having the problems, maybe aren't providing such good conditions, are not going to volunteer for that. That's just the way things work. So I'm really glad that they're doing that. It's wonderful. As we all know, we are currently at 0 active cases, which is excellent. And we haven't had a case actually test positive since I believe May 18th, which is really excellent. Again, public health success right there, many people doing the right things. But what's important and what I think has been highlighted by COVID is that health cannot be, especially public health, can't be treated as this, well, I'm fine, so you guys can go over there and I don't have to worry about you. Health is communal, and we need to recognize that, and everyone, aside from the fact that everyone's human, everyone should be healthy, everyone should have access to testing, which under the law they do. The health of this person over here who I don't know affects my health as well, affects my family's health, affects vulnerable people. And, we've done a great job celebrating our healthcare workers, our grocery store workers, which has been really wonderful. Those people are, essentially putting themselves at a higher level of risk to make sure we're taken care of and we can get what we need. But we also, if we're going to clap for nurses, we should also be clapping for the farm workers, because they're the reason we have food in the grocery stores at all. So I think it's important, and partly because of geography, they're off in the county and partly because of their long hours, we might not have as much contact with them within Belleville, let's say, but they're important and they matter, and it's important that we show an interest in what's happening with them, and we make sure that they're okay and that their conditions are okay, because we don't want what's been happening in places like Leamington. I know Marcus was telling me we had some positive tests in Vaughan recently. We don't want that to happen to our workers, because they're a very important part of our community. Again, they're the reason why you have fresh fruit in the grocery store right now. So I think that's an important thing, and I'm so glad public health is doing a great job taking care of this, and I hope we continue to be at 0. That's the ideal. So I'm glad that they're doing that. If you don't mind, next slide. It's showing as frozen on the challenges slide on mine, but that might just be, okay, next slide. And I believe, I'll check with Marcus and Loli, but I think this presentation will be emailed out to everyone who's attending and everybody who wasn't able to attend but signed up to attend. So if you want to refer back to it, it will be emailed to you. Excellent. So I just wanted to talk about how to support migrant workers and other newcomers in the community. I always like to end these kind of presentations on, you know, it's great to have all this information, but what can you do as an individual or as a worker at an agency or just a resident of Belleville, who cares, or of the Quinte region. I don't mean to specifically call out Belleville. One thing is just to, you know, you're taking the first step by attending this presentation, being aware, knowing the language. I know it can be kind of overwhelming. It's this very niche thing, and immigration has all these layers and complexities, and it can be hard to understand, but it's important to have sort of a general awareness. You don't need to be an immigration lawyer, but it's good to know what the pathways are, what options exist, what options don't exist, depending on different statuses. And having that information allows you to go out in the community and dispel misconceptions. Not all of the people who are walking around with incorrect information are doing so out of ill intent. Sometimes they just don't know, and they've heard things and they assume they're true because they haven't had direct contact with the immigration process. So I've heard, you know, throughout my life and also since working at Quist that the migrant workers on farms don't pay taxes. They absolutely do. They're paying all the same things that you pay out of your paycheck, or at least they should be. If they're not, if they're being paid in cash, that's the fault of that is on the employer. The people who are working the farms, they're doing it for the same reason you're going to your jobs. They have to buy groceries, they have to feed their kids, they want a better life than they had or their parents had. They're doing it for all the same reasons you are. So if their employer is not taking tax of their paycheck, is not taking EI, is paying them in cash, is doing any number of things, the fault of that is on the employer, and that needs to be addressed by the Ministry of Employment and other enforcement type agencies. So that's a really important thing to remember. I put confidentiality on here. I know as I went through school, there was a lot of emphasis on when do I have to report a suspicion of child abuse? When do I have to report someone who may be at risk of harming themselves? There's a lot of emphasis on that, which is important. You do have to know those things. One thing when it comes to immigration, if you have a client who discloses to you that their visitor permit has expired, that they're outside of status, that there's some people use the term in Canada illegally, but that's very stigmatizing, so we don't use that. That's not something you have to report. It's not your job to go and tell the Canada Border Services Agency. You have no obligation to do that whatsoever. I don't believe, aside from law enforcement, I don't believe anyone has the obligation to report to CBSA. So if a client does disclose that to you, you can keep that to yourself, and be very, very careful when you're making referrals. Always involve the client, get their consent when you have to talk to other people. Be careful, and you know, just do some research when you're referring them out to the community. See what's available to them. Like if you do encounter someone who's been a victim of trafficking, you know, you're welcome to call us, call FCJ Refugee Center. There's lots of really great resources out there. They can tell you what their options are, so that's really good. Informal support and volunteering, that's a little hamstrung by COVID. I keep bringing that up, but that's kind of the nature of things right now. But by all means, if you're able to, you know, if an agency is looking for support, or if just you have newcomers in your life who are looking for some kind of support, offer what you can, and what you can't offer, refer to places like Quist or ISCA in Kingston, again, FCJ Refugee Center. You know, offer what you can. It doesn't always have to be in the formal setting of volunteering. I kind of already touched on this, but when making referrals, I would recommend calling ahead and saying, I have a client and they're a refugee claimant. What's available at your agency? Because unfortunately there are some programs, due to the nature of funding, that people of certain statuses aren't able to access. And of course, when someone has no status, that becomes complicated, but especially in terms of temporary residents, so international students, migrant workers, visitors, all that, that's where you really get into the, oh, they can't have this, they can't have that. So it's very important to call ahead rather than just sending someone and they get told no. So that's very important to just do a little bit of research where you can. I know we're all very busy, but I appreciate it. Multilingualism wherever possible. I know it's not always possible to have multilingual staff, and of course you can't predict who's going to walk through the door. You can't have every language in the world. CEODIS does offer, I have these little things called language guides. They have I speak followed by whatever language written in that language. And they also have the flags of each country written beside those sentences. So if you encounter someone, you need to get an interpreter for them, but their English level is such that you can't even determine what language they speak. That's a resource that can be used. I can mail those out completely for free. They're laminated. You can post them, fold them up in your vehicle, whatever you need to do with them. And also, as before, we do provide a translation service that's fee for service. So if you want to contact me for a quote, if you want poster materials, presentations, manuals, anything like that, we can do essentially anything. Please feel free to contact me. And that's so important, even if it's just basic information. When it's in someone's language, they're that much more able to understand, to really take it home with them, and rather than just trying to decipher a brochure that's not in their first language. So it's very, very important. And if this is an issue you're passionate about, and I hope you are, since we're all here together, by all means, let your MPP, your MP, your municipal reps, whether it be city councilors, ward councilors, let them know how you feel. It doesn't have to be an angry email. Sometimes some of these issues, like the deaths of the workers, can make us very upset, but it's important to reach out, say, I'm a constituent, I'm supportive of this, this is how I feel about this, what are you doing in our community to address XYZ? By all means, and they often write you back. By all means, you can contact them by phone as well. Snail mail works. It's important because if we all just stay silent, then the MPs and MPPs won't know how we feel, and they'll vote according to the people who do speak up. So I always say it's the rule of 20. I've heard this in other circles from other settlement agencies, but if you can get 20 people to, well, we have to do it virtually, but show up to a council meeting and say, we feel this way about this issue, that's how you make change happen. So if this is something you care about, that's a good thing to keep in mind. Jen, do you have anything to add?
I just have one thing to add to your excellent suggestions. The Migrant Workers Alliance for Change recently released a fairly comprehensive report on temporary foreign workers in some of the, I would say, worst case scenarios that people have faced. They run a hotline that you can call in. You can be anonymous if you choose, and you can make a complaint, or you can make a complaint based on situations, or you can even call in on behalf of somebody that you're concerned about. And they record these complaints, and they try to provide support and information for people. In a period, I believe the report was from March to May, and in that period, regards to conditions and COVID and safety measures, they received hundreds of reports from hundreds of workers. And if you're very keen on this issue and you're wanting to know maybe why we see it as important as we do, if you're just coming to this issue and you hear that, oh, in this area, generally it's okay, it's good, I think, to take that next step and to see, what happens if it's not okay, right? What happens if people aren't following the rules? What happens when people find themselves in these worst case scenarios, and how do they cope with it? And how do they find strength and resilience in their life? And this report has a lot of really good case examples of situations of people that have found themselves in these situations. And you can find it on their website. It's Migrant Workers Alliance for Change. And they work as sort of a grassroots organization. And they have a lot of resources. So that's something else as well. And one of the things when you were talking about multilingualism is they were saying in some cases where these workers had to be hospitalized and had to then be put on ventilators, the doctors need to have verbal consent for this procedure to happen. And they need to have informed the patient as to what are the risks of going on to this ventilator, and if you don't come off the ventilator, and what does it do to your body, and what's the intervention like? And there were a number of situations where there wasn't multilingualism present, and it was very, very challenging to get any kind of actual understanding where people are signing something that concerns their medical well-being and they're not 100% certain as to what they're signing. There are other situations where they're signing, you know, things that say it's okay to deduct things from my pay. It's okay to take the things that I should be getting as an entitlement as an employee, and you can claw it back for me. So if you can provide things in the first language of this person, it really just gives them more empowerment. It allows them, again, to be able to choose their own destiny, right? Again, those are pretty serious situations, but I do think it underlines the importance of what you're saying here, Megan, is that in supporting people, you want to be supporting them based on their needs, not what you've decided that they need or what you're assuming they might want. You really need to communicate with that person directly to find out what is it in their life that you can do to help them. And I think that's probably the most important thing from my perspective, is knowing what actually can help this person, what can meet their needs, rather than sort of you deciding what it is, or again, putting yourself in a position where maybe you've taken away their choice and you haven't even realized it. And so anytime you're interacting in a situation like this, that's a really important thing to keep in mind.
Excellent. Well said, Jen. I agree. Especially with newcomers and refugees, they're often sort of being shuffled along through the immigration process, which can be very, you know, anytime we're dealing with government, it's very impersonal, it's very strict, it's very complicated. The more choice that you can offer them, the better, as they're going through this, because it really is, it's taxing, it's difficult to deal with. It's sometimes you're in situations where there are kind of no good options. There's only options that are less worse than the others. So anytime you can offer your clients more choice, more control, that's really empowering for them. And that's a really important thing to keep in mind. If you can go to the next slide, please. There we go. Excellent. So I just wanted to list off some resources. One thing I wanted to mention earlier, but I forgot to, and it's not included on here, but when talking about skilled work and what counts as skilled work, what counts for express entry, if you're ever curious, there's a thing called NOC codes, which are codes assigned to almost every single job. There's, of course, new job titles being created as the world moves forward. But their NOC stands for National Occupation Classification. It's available on the federal government website. And all those codes are ranked within skill levels. So it starts at 0 and goes A, B, C, D. So farm work, for an example, is, depending on what the person's doing, usually in the C or D level, which is skilled or somewhat skilled work. Whereas like my job, for example, in my program coordinator aspect, I'm a B. In my manager aspect, I'm an A. And 0 is the highest level, sort of CEOs and neurosurgeons and things like that. In terms of when dealing with international students, what counts for them to have a chance at express entry, they have to find work in jobs that are level B, A, or 0, or essentially they're wasting their time, when not wasting their time, but in terms of things that count towards express entry, C and D level jobs don't count. But of course we know if anyone's graduated college within the past 5 to 10 years, it's very hard to leave college and immediately get into a skilled job. And that's hard for domestic students. International students have these additional barriers of language, not having community ties that we do by virtue of growing up here, things like that. So that's important to keep in mind. That's a larger conversation. We could probably do another info session about that, but what counts as skilled work, what's valued. I will say I do find it interesting that, you know, we have the seasonal agricultural worker program by virtue of there were these massive job shortages. You can't find Canadians that are willing to do this work. And Jen, in her outreach to the farms, has run into a lot of employers who say, like, I'm hiring these foreign workers over and over again because they can do it. They can do it really fast. They've got the skills. If I hired someone, you know, locally who is a Canadian, they'd be working at half the speed. They wouldn't know what they're doing. I'd have to do all this training. So, and again, it's a very vital job. If we don't have food, none of us are going to be in a good spot. So it is a little bit interesting what the federal government decides is skilled work and unskilled work, but I'll leave that for a larger conversation for another time. I'll just quickly go through these resources. Settlement.org, I put a star beside it. If you have clients that are newcomers or refugees, wonderful, wonderful website. Many of its pages are translated into all kinds of different languages. And the ones that aren't, they're in very plain English. How do I get a driver's license? How do I register my children for school? There's also a page on there you can look for settlement services in your area, or if a client's moving away to Oshawa, what settlement services are in Oshawa. It's really, really handy. I recommend bookmarking it. It's a great website. I wanted to list the IRCC website. You know, that's if you need very official specific information or you're trying to get an application, that's where you need to go. Be careful with it because it does get spoofed sometimes. There's unfortunately a lot of scams targeted around immigration. We had a lovely client recently, an older gentleman. He was just trying to renew his PR card. He went to a spoof website instead of the real one, and I believe lost $300 and didn't get his PR card until he came to our office and got it all sorted out. So there's bad people out there. It's unfortunate, but just make sure you're going to the official canada.ca website, especially when referring clients, because it's just so easy for people to take advantage of people on the internet these days. I want to recommend Calc. They've been really wonderful with our clients. They handle all sorts of different types of legal help, and for what they can't help with, they make wonderful referrals. They're a really wonderful resource in the community. So if you're not already aware of them, make yourself aware of them. Visit their lovely website. They're very handy. Hastings and Prince Edward Public Health, that's a good place to check out as new orders come out, new press statements. They've been doing wonderful work. The Help and Legal Center in Cobourg, so they're Northumberland County, they have some staff that are not, I don't believe they're specifically immigration lawyers, but they are focused a little bit more around immigration. They had a program of sorts where they were helping some migrant workers in Northumberland as well as in the Quinte region who were experiencing things like wage theft and weren't being treated very well by their employers. So they're another great resource that you can reach out to. The Migrant Workers Alliance for Change is listed there as well. Quinte Labor Council, they unfortunately don't have a website, but they do have a Facebook page, and they've been posting a lot of really good news releases about what's going on with migrant workers as well as labor issues in general. So by all means, check them out. And we'll go to the last slide, well, the second to last slide. That's just our contact information. You can reach out to us. If you're calling us, please dial 0 and you'll reach our lovely colleague Olga, and she'll put you through to us because we're all working off cell phones right now and our laptops, but we can talk to you by email as well. We do have a Facebook page. Feel free to follow us there. And again, just one thing to note, if you're referring clients to us, we were at our old address on Octavia Street for close to 20 years. So just make sure they're aware of our new address so they don't end up going to the wrong place. We're still trying to get the word out that we've moved, but things change slowly. So just one thing to keep in mind. I'll go to the very last slide, and it's question time. We are here to answer your questions, so feel free to leave them in the chat, as Marcus said at the top of this presentation.
So yeah, that's correct. If you have any question, just use the option on the right side of your screen to write us the questions, and we can go over them. But yeah, I think Loli wants to add a little bit about the resources.
Yeah, one of the resources that you can use is that we have the Canadian Human Trafficking hotline. If you feel that someone is in a situation, it will be good if they can give you resources or refer you where is close to you and to help. And the telephone number is 1-833-900-1010. And that most of the time, what they do is that they refer you to the appropriate organizations that they can help you. But that's a place that you can even call and could be anonymous. Any questions?
So let's check if we have any questions. So yeah, let me just. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, so I think at the moment we don't have any questions. I would like to. Oh, we have a couple of people. Thanking everyone for the presentation. So yeah, we would like to extend these words to Megan and to Jan. Thank you very much for being here with us today for presenting. It was a really useful, pretty informational experience. Me, I am an international student myself. It's always good to see information out there about international students, about postgraduate work permit. It's always good to get a refreshment and then to stay updated to this topic. And I think not only as a presenter, I talk as an attendee. It was a pretty good information session. Of really thank you to Quinta Immigration Services for providing this information to us as well.
I saw that someone with the name of Olga, you want to do a question, will be good if you can send it by write your questions. We are not that tech yet on this. And to open microphone, I will need someone with our technical support. But if you write your questions, we will be more than happy to answer.
Excellent. Well, we're just waiting for questions to come in. I just wanted to say thank you to Loli and Marcus, the other staff of the FCJ Refugee Center. They've been wonderful. I appreciate you guys so much for participating in this presentation with us. I'm so glad you're a resource and you're willing to reach out to us in little Bay of Quinte down here. Really appreciate it. It's been wonderful. Like I said, hopefully we can email out the presentation to everyone who's attended and signed up. So feel free to share it with your colleagues. I'm hoping this will spark conversations in the community. And if you'd like maybe sort of a mini information session for your staff, or you'd like more information shared with you, by all means, reach out to us, reach out to the staff of FCJ. We'd be more than happy to do that, because we want this information to keep spreading. We want people to continue understanding what is a very complex topic on the surface, but it's very important to understand because it affects everyone, not just people who work in the settlement sector and not just people who are newcomers themselves. So again, I really appreciate you for joining us for the presentation and for everyone who attended. Thank you guys. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Let me see. There is no more questions. Oh yes. How can we support migrant workers that do not speak English in the area?
Okay, that's a good question. So CEODIS is available. It is fee for service, unfortunately, because neither the provincial government nor federal government are, for lack of a better word, interested in funding interpretation services at this moment. If you have, depending on what language the person speaks, you may be able to reach out to people in the community. We do keep our rates at CEODIS at sort of the bare minimum, where we need to pay our interpreters what the standard rate is, and we can make adjustments. You know, we can do telephone over the telephone interpretation instead of face-to-face, or video chat, or even message relays to clients if you want an email translated, essentially, things like that. So, you know, wherever that's possible. I know we're all on tight budgets, that can be challenging. I will mention, I didn't include in the resource section, if someone's dealing with issues of sex trafficking or domestic violence, sexual violence as well, there is an interpretation service called the LIS. It's based out of Ottawa, and that one is funded by the government and is free. So if you do encounter someone who's in a situation like that, that would be covered. But by all means, you know, reach out to me. We can talk if you have someone that you need to support who doesn't speak English as their first language. Reach out and we'll figure out something as best we can.
Also, we can add as a resource that is all in Ontario, the Multicultural Interpreter Services. If you are, you don't need to be identified, but if you are a victim of human trafficking or rather that having been identified by the authorities. But if your organization, after seeing all the elements that we were expressing, if there is a case of human trafficking, they provide that interpreter services. And our organization, as it's open for, and there is no located only in Toronto, we can also help through we have at home, we have English, Spanish, Portuguese, French, and Arabic. And if anything that you need, we can connect, because it's not just that we are here in Toronto, but also we can connect you with Chris, and then we can work together with the case.
Excellent. Any other questions?
So yeah, I think for the questions that was it. It was a pretty good question. And yeah, so once again, thank you everyone. Thanks Megan, thanks Jen. I can't wait for our next information session.
Okay.
For sure.
Care.
All right, thank you everyone. Stay safe, take care.
Take care.
Thank you, Jen.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Stay cool.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye.